Welcome to Laplink Connections. Today I'm talking with Pieter Knook, who was an old, or is an old colleague of mine. He was the Senior Vice President of Mobile Communications at Microsoft, later an executive at Vodafone running the internet business there. And now on so many boards, it's hard to count, but he's chairman of Broad Horizon and LINX, the London Internet Exchange, but also board member with Telenor. So a lot of experience outside our old traditional world. And so I am very glad to talk to you today. Hi, Pieter, how are you?
I'm fine. Thank you, Thomas. Thanks for the very good introduction.
Yes, well, it's, we haven't talked too much, but the interesting point was that I got your Christmas letter, and there was one phrase that you said that really triggered this discussion, because you said that the internet held up, during the year, and that kind of started in a thought, because the workplace has changed quite a bit. We have more home offices, more remote work, probably much more gaming. Have we seen an increase in internet traffic due to this, or was this all organic growth? Some operators said, they saw a growth of like 10%, a surge. Do we actually have a limit in how big the internet can be?
Well, inevitably, some traffic obviously got switched because people weren't working in the office, they were working from home. So, that's the same traffic, but it just got routed slightly differently. But overall, I think the fact that we were doing many, many more video calls, and that's been a growing trend for a little while, even before Corona, that is the biggest driver of traffic growth, because, the Netflixes and so on going into on-demand loading of video or video conferencing such as we're doing now, that drives more traffic than almost anything else, because all the phone calls, all the emails and so on are de minimis compared to the amount of video that we're now dealing with. So that's really where the traffic growth has been. And that pattern of working has become, well, I won't say permanent, but it's sort of ingrained now to the point where when someone offers me a voice-only call, I'm really surprised, because you expect to have a video discussion with somebody in a business context these days, and perhaps even at a personal level.
Yeah, absolutely. It changed quite a bit. I mean, we had video conferencing with the old TV monitors and cameras and all that, and we used it once in a while because we couldn't meet in person. But I think there was a greater reluctance, and perhaps not the technology, not the throughput with video conferencing, and that really has changed. Despite the fact that I miss traveling, it's so much easier to just have a quick call versus 20 hours in a plane. That really has changed.
It really is. And for someone like me who time slices between a variety of different boards, I have about half a dozen, but 3 or 4 that are pretty active. So in a typical week, I'm moving between my boards for Oslo, London, or maybe even New Jersey. And I can do that with a few minutes notice, whereas, as you say, getting on a plane is a pain compared to that. And it's worse now with all the tests that you have to do and all the documents you have to prepare before you go anywhere. So travel wasn't a great pleasure before, but it's become an even more daunting process, which makes the video even more attractive as a communication tool, which is why I think people are doing more and more of this.
Yeah, no, that's certainly correct. Now, when we talk about bandwidth and demands on the internet, we're now seeing certainly 5G emerging much stronger. 5G has been in the market for many years, I would say, as a marketing slogan, not really much as a technology, because the promised bandwidth was not there. Yeah, from LTE to 5G, it was a little increase, but now Verizon announced their ultra-wide, kind of true 5Gs, where they are talking about 1 gigabit of service, which would mean now you are getting much more throughput which means probably more videos on the handset. And of course, not everything is wireless because it all comes together into the internet backbones.
Yep.
Yeah, and will create much more traffic. So do you see that there will be more and a bigger surge in connectivity and demand on the bandwidth when the real 5G is commencing?
Yeah, well, there's no question. I mean, I think when you're talking about it from a consumer perspective, we all expect 4K Ultra UHD video, 1080p is no longer enough. So the number of bits per second that we're all consuming has gone up fourfold just by that extra resolution. And the device we're carrying in our pocket, an iPhone or whatever, they're all recording video in 4K format. So that is an explosion of bits. And as I said before, video is by far the dominant traffic generator in the network. Now, then when you turn to the operator's view of 5G, yeah, you're right. There's not a huge improvement over LTE, but we do get some new frequencies. And especially with all the new antenna technology, there is some greater spectral efficiency, but we can blast people with much higher data rates. And so that does make a difference when you get to that 1 gig point, as you point out. I also think for the operators, probably the biggest impact of 5G that we talk about very little is the reduction in latency, the amount of time it takes between for the packet to actually travel through the network itself. And with 5G, that's gone down dramatically from where it was with 3G and 4G. So I think that makes a bigger difference than anything else. And that opens up new use cases on 5G that weren't possible before. You know, typically when you're thinking, for example, as one scenario with virtual or augmented reality, where you've got your goggles on and you're looking at a particular picture and you move your head. As you do that, of course, a new picture has to be displayed on your system, and the delay between that movement of getting the new picture into your headset, if you're doing that over a 5G network, that delay comes much lower. And that means that for the user, that sort of scenario makes you not sick. Whereas on a 4G network doing that, you would get sick because as you move your head, it takes 100 milliseconds for the picture to update. On a 5G network, you could do that in 10 milliseconds. And that's enough for the human eye to perceive the difference. It makes a huge difference in how you make a scenario like that work. So that's just one example of how.
Yeah, no, but that's an important scenario, because when we talk about autonomous driving, you know, we're far away from the real autonomous driving, because one car by itself cannot have all the information about the traffic. I mean, you think the truck coming from the right behind the building, you can't see that. So that truck needs to communicate with a tower and a server to communicate with all the other cars, and their latency is very, very important. And so true autonomous driving is when we have true, you know, very low latency 5G.
That's true. There's sometimes people confuse that scenario with when my car needs to decide to brake, it needs to go to a central server to ask for permission to turn the brakes on. I don't think that's going to happen. I think the car's going to make that decision locally.
I agree with that, but
I hope that's the case, because if not, we're really in trouble.
Yeah. Well, there is still a lot to come. Now, on another subject in that area, big data. You know, is also one of the keywords, AI connected with that. That's still also in the infancy, because we're collecting more and more data. If we think of what, especially from IoT devices, you know, the big example is always the airplane engines that create terabytes of data for transatlantic flight. I mean, they all get stored so that it can be analyzed. So our storage gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And AI needs to, you know, work with that to find solutions. Data is there to create new ideas, create solutions. You're working with a lot of AI startups and also established business. Where do you see the biggest leap in technology in that area, big data and AI?
Well, the risk is that, of course, AI is such a buzzword that everybody wants to claim that they're doing AI, and there are only a few businesses that are really doing AI. I've got one, Alpha 10X, which is a business founded by an ex-Microsoft guy who we're really trying to use all the data that's available about investing to try and make better decisions on allocating capital. So if you had access to every single investment that's ever been made, and you can determine which ones created a good outcome and which ones didn't, you could probably create as good a decision tree as a human can. In the same way as we do it, for example, in a medical field where you scan lots of eyes and you look in the retinal scans to see, well, which people are likely to have some problem in their eye. And frankly, an AI can do that more accurately and better than a human. You then still pass here's a suspected case of someone who's got some eye problem, or here's a potential investment that could look very interesting. The final decision still gets made by a human, but all the preparatory work gets done by the AI in the background on a huge amount of data that a human can't cope with. And so it's that interaction between the human and the analysis that the AI can do, which is, I think, a huge, huge opportunity in so many different fields. That's where I get excited, actually.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. And I think what you are saying is also we are just a little bit into that technology. A lot of AI, because of the buzzword, is, yeah, I have a terabyte of data, I analyzed it, and here are the trends. Yeah, well, that's not necessarily AI. AI is where you take new decision or recommendations based on the data in a different way. So what the brain normally does, we look at a certain situation and say, well, that feels like this or this, and therefore I have to do this. And so I think we're very early on. Yeah, I think that's still a very fascinating area.
I'll give you a good counterexample, because I'm always a little bit frustrated. In the early days when you bought something from Amazon, they were very good at saying, well, people like you who've bought this kind of product are also buying this product. Now, when I just recently bought a camera for inspecting down a tube and being able to look inside a wastewater pipe to see where the blockage is. Well, now Amazon is recommending me more cameras of the same type when I just bought one. I say, that's the most stupid use of AI I've ever seen. Why would I want to buy another one when I've just bought it? So there are examples where people don't use AI, even though they claim they are, but it's a poor result for the end user of that service or product.
Right. That's just putting a pixel on your PC, a little cookie that, oh, you looked at a camera, serve them up more cameras. You looked at a PC, Now, of course, for business, that's good. We do that all the time. When you buy a PC, look at our PC Mover software, because, we are migrating your data. Okay,
sure.
So we would say, yeah, that's a good recommendation. But yeah, buying the third or fourth PC sometimes for consumer doesn't make any sense. But, just from our talk, you're involved in a lot of technology in a lot of companies. And you probably see a lot of new ideas in the marketplace with the startups. You're also, in the investment community, where you probably see a lot of business plans.
Yeah.
What's your advice to young entrepreneurs if they want to take their ideas and put it into reality? Are there some magic bullets for them, or some advice you can give? What they should do?
I think that's a very tricky question, because for me, the successful entrepreneurs have the right balance between being able to be persistent and continue with a strategy and a course of action despite problems that you get on the way, sales that didn't happen, competitors that fought you or whatever. But there's a point at which, when you get enough data from the market that says, no, this proposition isn't working, you have to change. And it's that balance between being adaptive and being persistent that I think is the trick for a great entrepreneur. And it's very hard to say always be persistent or always change. You don't want the whiplash of someone who's changing their mind every other time they talk to a new customer who says they didn't like something or they did like something else. Nor do you want someone who's plowing on and plowing on for a year before they've decided that actually where they headed wasn't quite where they wanted to go. So that is getting that balance right, I think, for entrepreneurs is the hardest thing. And when I look at it, unfortunately, as a sort of slightly more wizened person, you see a lot of business ideas presented to you and say, yeah, I remember that idea. I worked on that in 92. It didn't work then. I don't think it'll work now. So my inclination is always to say, well, yeah, been there, done that, try it. And some of these young entrepreneurs have the naivety to say, well, I don't know that, so I'm going to try it. And of course, because they're adapting, they will actually end up with something clever and useful, because they will change it as they're going along. And because they've got that balance right between, no, we're not going to keep just persisting for the sake of it, and we're not just going to keep changing for the sake of it. If we get the balance right, then a great entrepreneur will find their route to success.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, because on one hand, being persistent, I think it's very important. I mean, when I, talk with VCs, where, the question of funding, when we needed it, and they would say, oh, drop everything there. You have to go just laser sharp into one direction. And I said, well, I have to pay salaries. I can't just drop everything that makes money and go for the new buzzword, like go to the cloud, do this. Well, for PC migration, the cloud is great, but too slow. So, so you would lose the business. So persistent, when a lot of people say, well, perhaps not, but adapting to the market. And, the persistent argument would also work for what you said before, have done that, is, of course, that a lot of the successful companies were not the first ones.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Facebook was not the first one. Google was not the first search company.
Microsoft, of course, usually wasn't the first.
Yeah, but they also did a lot of first that they abandoned.
Quite.
Yeah, because they didn't think it was. I mean, if you remember, Microsoft had tablet technology much earlier, but it didn't come into fruition because we didn't have 3G. The Apple tablets and all the other tablets suddenly were made possible because the internet, the mobile 3G was there. Before that, it was just a tablet to do something, but you had no connectivity. So yeah, persistence, but also change with reality. I think that's great advice. Well, thank you very much, Peter. I really appreciate talking with you today. Great insights, and hopefully we'll talk soon again.
You're most welcome, Thomas. It's been a pleasure catching up with you again.
Okay, bye-bye.